Word new here.
Numbing hand.
Word new here.
Essence of slug. Numbing hand.
Word new here.
Essence of slug. Numbing hand.
Word new here.
Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of It's Time to Rewind, the podcast trapped in its own time loop right along with the movies we discuss. This season is the serial bomb, yo, and we're looking at Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, starting off with Buffy Season 6, Episode 5, Life Serial. Today we're discussing the first act in the episode, starting at the beginning of the episode and ending at 9 minutes and 58 seconds, with the trio scoring Warren's test on the Slayer. Today my guest is Marc from French Toast Sunday. How are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome, Bubba. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. I'm really excited to start on this Buffy and Angel season. It's weird because both of these episodes take place towards the end of each of the series. And it's a lot of people think that, that's kind of where the series have both kind of gone downhill. Although I think the last season of Angel is better than the last couple seasons of Buffy.
Yeah. You know what? It's been a while since I've watched both series, but I feel that's true. I think Buffy was 7 seasons long, and Angel wound up running for 5.
Right.
And
it was so weird. I'll probably talk about it more whenever I get to the Angel episode, but the Angel cancellation was so bizarre because it was like the number one episode, the number one show on the WB, and they're like, oh, we just want to bring in some new shows, and they cancel it out of nowhere.
It was it felt more concise overall looking at Angel and when compared to Buffy. Like I do think that Buffy, I would agree with that sentiment that the last 2 seasons kind of tapered off a bit, whereas you didn't see that as much with Angel.
Well, I know Buffy was kind of a weird situation too, because they thought that it was ending for good at the end of season 5, because the WB had canceled it, and then the UPN came along as this brand new network, and like, well, we'll take it for another couple seasons, and
right?
So that because it ended so perfectly in a lot of people's ways with her doing her self-sacrifice for Dawn. And then now they have to figure out a way to bring her back, and a lot of people didn't mesh with that. So I mean, since we're talking a little bit about the history of Buffy, where did you first watch Buffy? Do you remember?
Oh, absolutely. So I got into Buffy literally at the turn of the century. I can say that. I was in middle school when Buffy came on. And when it was on WB originally, I remember when, at least for me, in my TV watching habits, the WB was not a channel on like regular cable. For a while, the WB was like a premium channel that you had to pay extra for, and my parents didn't do that. So I got into Buffy, I think, around season 3, which would put it around, I think maybe 98, 99. So that's where I got into it. And it was nothing else like it on TV for me. Like the writing was so quippy and smart, and at that point, I didn't see anything else. I haven't seen anything else like that. So I was, from there until it ended in 2003, it was like my senior in high school, I was a avid Buffy fan.
Yeah, I honestly can't remember for certain where I first discovered Buffy myself. I didn't watch it in its first run, I don't believe, because I don't think I ever really paid any attention to the WB or UPN. Definitely not UPN. So I think I started watching it whenever they started picking up reruns on what network was it? Like Lifetime or We.
I think FX had them for a while. I think FX was the spot before streaming went big that will show Buffy all the time.
Yeah, it could have been that. And so I think I started watching it, on cable, just catching reruns. And I really enjoyed it then. And then whenever they came out with the DVDs, I got the DVDs. And that's, I think, whenever I watch them a lot is on DVD. And that's basically where I kind of fell in love with it. I've definitely seen the first 3 to 4 seasons many, many times. Because I think whenever I'm doing a rewatch, I usually kind of falter somewhere in the 4th season into the 5th. And I've only watched the 6th and 7th seasons maybe once or twice, I think. So I've been rewatching the 6th season, and it's weird to start off at the 6th season as a jumping on point, because there's so much baggage from the end of the 5th season that they have to work out. And I don't have, a clear memory of a lot of the 5th season because it's been such a long time since I've seen it. But it has the introduction of the trio for most of the first, 2/3 of this season until the big bad basically transitions into Dark Willow. What's your thoughts on the trio overall as this season's like big bad?
I think I enjoyed it. Now, again, I haven't done a run through of Buffy and Angel in, I would say, about a decade. Now, much like yourself, I do have the DVDs and I rewatched them. I will have to say, after watching both series in their original runs, I may have rewatched like the entire series of both Buffy and Angel maybe twice. And the last time was about a decade ago. But
I think about the same here.
Yeah, but about watching, today's episode, I know we're talking about a particular scene, but I wanted to rewatch the whole episode. I liked the fact this idea of, there's the mad scientist kind of trope, the big bad that's sciencey, in sci-fi fantasy,
like the mad science supervillain, like the Lex Luthor type.
Exactly. Like, that
and they don't reference it, and they don't name drop him in this episode, but they do name drop him early on in this season. Because I did start rewatching season 6 from the beginning, and at this point in the recording, I'm at about episode 14-ish.
Okay. Yes, but I love how they turned that idea on its head a little bit. Like, okay, yes, evil, mad scientist, genius villain, but these are 3 nerds in their parents' basement.
Yeah, and it's really, as you watch it more and the way that the actors portrayed them, you realize that only one of them is really evil and the other 2 are just basically minions, just trying to fit in.
Right. But I love the fact that I'm watching it older now. Like, I like how they subverted that particular archetype in sci-fi. And it kind of gives like this warmth. Like, yeah, I remember this now. Like, I now need to rewatch the whole series, which I will be doing in the very, very near future. But yes, I love the idea of how they played with that particular, archetype of the mad scientist villain.
Yeah, and so, I should set up a little bit better, where this episode fits into the Buffy canon, because this is episode 5 in season 6, and I already mentioned the switch over to UPN, and so they brought Buffy back to life, and she revealed to the audience and Spike that she was in heaven, because everybody else thinks that they pulled her out of some hell dimension, but she was actually pulled out of heaven, and so she's readjusting to life. That basically makes it feel like the real world is hell compared to heaven. And so she's readjusting to living again and living in a way where it feels worse than death.
Right.
And the beginning of the episode is right before she had a meeting with Angel, which is never shown or talked about, and again, that's because of that switch to UPN, because Angel was still showing on the WB, And so at this point in time, they weren't really allowed to do any crossover episodes. So that's why in both shows, they just reference meeting each other. And then the next episode, they're back. And they don't really reference exactly what happened at all. They did do a comic called Reunion, which kind of addresses the meeting, but again, it doesn't directly show what happens. It's more about like the other characters, like Willow and Dawn, talking with each other and discussing how they think the meeting happened.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of a weird way to address it. So this is really just, Buffy trying to get back into a normal life to see where she fits in. So I think this is interesting because, I watching it on the DVD copy versus the watching it on Hulu, which that's where I watched it myself, is that Hulu puts back in the previously on in the show, and the DVD cuts that out. And I think that's interesting, especially because the previously on, especially like jumping into season 6 like I've been doing, it does have the occasional clips from season 5, which gives a little bit of helpful backstory. If you've forgotten, like you're taking breaks between episodes and you're not binging it like most people do these days.
Right. And I watched it on Amazon Prime, and they also had in the previously on, which was very helpful because again, hadn't watched the episode in a decade. Like, oh, yeah, okay, yep, awesome.
And Buffy comes in and she has this bucket of chicken, a very generic bucket with just a picture of a chicken and no logos, no KFC or anything on it. And the rest of the Scooby Gang, or at least, Willow, Tara, Dawn, and Giles are having dinner at Buffy's house. And I think it's great because you can see that Dawn's chair is like pieced together with Bondo or duct tape or a combination of both. Because just in the last episodes, a demon or vampire came in and busted up her house, and she was complaining about how her mom must have dealt with this happening all the time, having to fix or replace things so often. And also, like, you can see Tara's chair doesn't match the other two, and you can't see it here, but the seats that at the ends that Giles is sitting in and the one that Buffy is about to sit in is also a different set. Those two are covered in fabric, where the other three are typical, like, wooden kitchen chairs. And, like, most of the plates don't exactly match. It's a bunch of, everything's kind of hodgepodge. And, everybody has already eaten, even though Buffy comes in with this chicken, but they all kind of humor her. And they have this joke, which I'm not a huge fan of, where Willow's like, I'm a breast girl myself, but you already know that. And then her and Tara have this look at each other.
Yes. This is what happens when straight men writes lesbians. Yeah. So this Joss Whedon, in the 90s, that would have been like, oh, that's cheeky and fun.
But actually, it's funny that you mentioned that. I didn't say it, but this episode was actually written by Jane Espenson.
Oh.
So this episode was written by a woman.
Oh. They made her put that joke in. They made her do it. I'm assuming.
Yeah, because one other thing is, this was whenever Joss Whedon himself was stretched very thin, because we have this season of Buffy. We already talked about, I think it's season 3 of Angel, and then this is also the same year that he's working on Firefly. So he's doing 3 shows at the same time. And I think he mostly was hands-off with Buffy during this season.
Which would make sense. It's already kind of established. You're just following, the road that's been paved before you at this point.
Yeah. And the episode again takes a moment to remind us of Buffy's financial troubles. And I'm really surprised, like, whenever you look at the logistics of this, that there's been nothing set up at this point in time. Because if you think about it, Willow and Tara have been staying at the Summers house for at least 6 months now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there was some life insurance. Maybe not on Buffy herself, but on Joyce, who died just last season. And in all this time, nothing has happened with Dawn's guardianship. I mean, is Willow and Tara, they don't ever mention it, but do you think that they're her, like, legal guardians at this point?
So that's a good question. Well, if you remember in the previously on, there was a brief second where they kind of explained away the life insurance policy, like it all went to medical bills for Joyce towards the end. Yeah, so that was a conversation that happened. And as far as guardianship for Dawn, that is a plot hole. Or what I'm thinking.
I know that it comes up again later this season with, social services getting involved, questioning whether Buffy is an appropriate guardian for Dawn.
Yeah. So I think no one else knew that Buffy died outside of the Scooby Gang.
But I was curious about that, but she had a physical gravesite. Like, how would you get this gravesite with her body being buried if you're doing this under the radar? I know they have the Buffy bot, but I always assumed that was more for the demons and the vampires rather than the actual U.S. legal process. Because I would think if she was in a grave in a cemetery, that they would have had to have like some sort of death certificates, and she'd been declared dead because there was a physical body.
Right. That is a good point. I do not know. But hey, it's the Hellmouth. Who knows?
So it's like, do they have to like resend her death certificates? Because it would make sense if there was like no body, which like I said, I didn't rewatch the 5th season finale when she died. Mm-hmm. Like I couldn't, like I was thinking that she just kind of disappeared, but no, there was clearly a body, because there was the moments that I forgot about when they brought her back to life, where you see her decomposed corpse, freshen back up into Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know. Maybe they just, thought that again, that was too real to get into the way of the plot. Like, yeah, let's not get lost in the minutia here. And just kind of like, didn't dive into that. But as an adult, yes, all of those are great questions that should be answered.
Yeah, I think it's funny because they are kind of, like, in a way, they're dealing with some minutia with the, she needs to get a job, have some source of income, but they're not dealing with all of the minutia. They're just dealing with some of it.
Right.
And so they come up with, Willow and Tara come up with this idea, because Giles asks, so what are you going to do? And Buffy initially starts talking about how to postpone bills. Like, well, I'll pay for this bill this month, and then the next bill the next month. And he's like, no, I mean, what are you going to do with your life? And this is where they come up with, going back to school, which I think that completely sidesteps the question, because the immediate situation is that there's no money coming in, and their first solution is, oh yeah, you'll just sit in at classes. But for one, that doesn't make her any money, and two, it doesn't give her any sort of exemptions for being a student, because she's not a student. Because like in some cases you can have some sort of exemptions, like if you're a student and actively attending classes, but I don't think auditing classes counts in any of those situations.
It does not. I don't believe it does. College was quite some time ago. I'm trying to think of audits and how that works, but yeah, it really doesn't solve the issue at hand that there is no money. Like the solution, hey, go to school.
As far as I can tell, like auditing a class is basically just getting permission to sit into class to see how it goes in order to, so you can decide if you actually want to take it as a class to get credit for it.
Oh, wow. I had never done that in my college career. That was doable. That's just like, that was just like, just lying around, just like sneaking in. My classes were far too small for audit, like for a teacher not to notice that a new kid's sitting in there. Interesting.
Well, that's why like auditing is you have to get permission, because I do think that it's a formal process. You can't just like go in. I mean, you could, especially in like other types of classes that you see in like other movies and TV shows where it's like you got the big stadium seating and there's like, 100 students in the class. Yeah, you can just hop in there and the teacher's not likely going to notice one extra person.
Right.
But yeah, and this is especially, I mean, we don't see it yet, but this is like a smaller classroom. So I think that Buffy would have definitely had to have gotten permission to sit in on the class.
Mm-hmm. I see your point.
And I do like how that scene ends, because the last line is Buffy asking Giles if he thinks it's a good idea. And he doesn't actually answer it. Like she asks, she looks at Giles and asks him if it's a good idea, and he just kind of doesn't really say anything, just kind of nods and kind of gives his approval. But I do like that this really sets up this relationship between Buffy and Giles and how it's changing, at least in a one-sided way, where Giles is trying to push her to make all these decisions for herself, but she's still looking at Giles as this father figure and this person that she can go to with all the answers.
Right. And I get it. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I understand that at some point you want, to have your quote unquote kids, think for themselves. But come on, man. She lost her dad. Well, she lost her mom, episode 16, the last season out of a 22 episode season. So fairly recently, she lost her mom. She came back from the dead. Give the girl some guidance, give her some stability. Okay. There are a lot of factors, unaccounted for in the air. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, and it's weird too, because he did leave for England, and then he came back whenever he found out that Buffy was alive.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like he left, then he came back, and then he's going to leave again.
Right. So weird.
Yeah. But then we jump in and we get to see the trio working on their Death Star van. I do want to talk just a moment about this set that they're in and this garage, because I do love it's only on screen for like just a few seconds.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's really nice, and I like that the siding is all cracked, so you can tell that it's old, and there's some bikes. But whose house do you think that they're in at right now? Do you think this is Warren's house?
That is a good question. I do not know.
Because you can see there's a triangle, and there's also like a plastic big wheel.
Yes.
So do you think that there is like a younger sibling living at the house at the moment, or do you think that whosever house it is, like whether it's Warren's, Jonathan's, or Andrew's, do you think that that's like their childhood stuff that their parents have kept in the garage?
I think it's that. I think it's that's one of the trio's big wheel, honestly. I don't think there's currently a child staying there, but I think that's like a remnant of their of someone's childhood. And Jonathan is giving me very much a Steve vibe from Blue's Clues in his rugby polo that he has on.
This very colorless, like it's brown and beige.
Yes.
Striped. And
but it's yeah.
And then Warren's on this, this wheelie working underneath the van with these nice shades, and the van's on blocks, even though one of the wheels is not on blocks. And we get to see a quick inside of the van. And I do have to point out that this feels very late 90s, early 2000s, because you can see some koosh balls hanging around.
Oh, koosh balls. I had a koosh ball slingshot that I loved. Oh, God. Do they still make koosh balls?
I think they do, but I think you only see them like in certain parts of like certain toy stores or like specialty shops. They're definitely not as big as they were in the 90s and 2000s, because you don't have Rosie O'Donnell throwing them out into the audience anymore.
Oh, yeah, that was a thing. That was a thing.
And there's also, there's a couple computer monitors, a surge protector. This thing right here at the bottom center of the screen, I think that's like a Newton, like one of those early Palm computers. Like
a Palm Pilot.
Yes, I think that's what it is. Like you can't really see anything on the screen. You just kind of see like a blank screen. But I think that's what it's supposed to be. Either that or it's like maybe an early version of like those touchscreen tablets where you can use it to input touch, like a drawing tablet in a way.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely even like a PDA, a personal. Weren't they called PDAs?
Yeah, a personal digital assistant.
Yes. Oh god, technology.
And we also have a couple, white joysticks, one on either side. I think that looks like the one on the left side here has like a trackball connected to it. Mm-hmm. And then other than that, it's like both sides of the van are just filled with like generic tech movie props that just have a bunch of LED lights and squares and keypads that don't really signify anything. They're just
right.
generic techie stuff.
Yes. And one other thing I do want to add about the trio, it just dawned on me. The trio was kind of the first time that I remember nerd culture being kind of represented in TV, like in this particular way. Like the whole little argument they had about the Death Star and where the exhaust vent was placed. Like I remember like being, a kid, like listening to that and like chuckling, like, yeah, that's people actually talk about that, So like how they actually interwoven actual conversations people who would be into this sort of thing would have, in their day-to-day life, but having it on TV was a moment. It was something that you didn't see too often. Now you do. Yeah. Everybody's a D&D nerd, and being quote unquote nerdy is now very much in fashion. So everybody wants to embrace it now, but it wasn't always like that. It was very put to the side. It wasn't in mainstream culture. It wasn't reflected in this way in mainstream culture up until this point. But that was one thing that I appreciated about the trio.
Yeah, I also liked, especially looking back on it, that this is like an early example of like the toxic nerd culture too.
Very true. Very true.
And I like, but I also dislike this because, this is a scene about nerds being pedantic about stuff. So I have to be pedantic about these pedantic nerds. The fact that, this is supposedly Andrew airbrushing the Death Star on the side of the van, and there's also some TIE fighters, but I think that these are clearly decals and not. I don't think that anyone would be able to airbrush something like this, especially with an airbrush that doesn't seem like it's connected to any sort of air supply, as far as I can tell.
Well, wait, is that a crack in the ground, or is that? That is definitely a crack in the pavement, and not like a air compressor tube. Yeah. There's nothing attached to that.
I mean, I guess it's possible that's like a small CO2 tank in his hand, but you'd have to go through several CO2 tanks to airbrush something that big.
True. Maybe, you know what? Maybe he was just doing the detail work, that would require, just a little, pressure tank to do, like the finishing touches maybe, and not the bulk of the work.
Yeah, and I also, I have a problem with their argument about the exhaust part, because for one, I don't think you can see specifically where the exhaust port is, and the fact that it's clearly the Return of the Jedi Death Star because it's the incomplete one. And right. Jonathan is arguing that the Jedi plans are faulty, but it was the New Hope Death Star that had the weakness with the exhaust port. And the Return of the Jedi was destroyed partly because it was unfinished. And so it had a completely different weakness. Which I don't even think that it specifically had a weakness. They just, it's been too long since I've watched Return of the Jedi, so I don't remember exactly how they blew it up. But thinking back, I feel like it was just partly because it was uncompleted. Even though it was fully operational, I think just the fact that it was uncompleted meant that it had more exposed weaknesses.
Yeah. God, don't get me started. I don't remember the last time I watched the original trilogy. Oh, God. I have no idea. But yes, I will agree with your assessment there.
Yeah, I went a little bit farther, and I guess you can see that he has like an aerosol can for the air supply.
Mm-hmm.
So then it jumps into the credits, and I do have a little background that I looked up about the opening credits from the Buffyverse wiki. So the Buffy font was created by Margot Chase for the show, and the original logo, the Vampire Slayer, used a font called Herculanum, and that was the same font used in the title cards, and the final logo uses Chase's own typeface, Cruella, for the Vampire Slayer. And at the beginning, there's also a very quick animation with some words on pages. And the first page is a German holiday greeting. The second page, you really just see like two words that say who died. And the third page that you see is an excerpt from the Bible, Exodus 32:1, also in German. And the theme song was from Nerf Herder. And in an interview, they explained how they produced the theme. The Buffy production hired some famous theme song composer to come up with a theme, and they didn't like the one he came up with. So since they were on a low budget, they asked local bands to come up with theme song ideas. And they actually had done the theme song before the show was on the air. It was already written, but they didn't know what to do with it. They were originally going to do some sort of science fiction theme, which they said was weird because they don't generally do songs like that. They had a working title of Outer Space Rock or something like that. And the opening credits have 64 different clips from various seasons of the show. And I'm definitely not going to go through all 64 of them, but they are all listed on the Buffyverse wiki if you want to know what episodes they pulled from the clips for to use in the opening credits. What do you think about the song? Are you someone that whenever you're doing a rewatch, are you a skip the credits or listen to the credits, or it depends on the show?
It depends on the show. It really does. And considering that the last time I rewatched this was on DVD, it was a bit of I let it play all the way through because it's a bit of an issue. You're fast forwarding, trying to get past the credits, and you miss like the first minute, after the credits. It's like, just watch it play, It's okay. But, with the advent of technology and electronic streaming services, we can easily just hit the skip feature and it picks up exactly where we need it to be. Thanks Netflix and Amazon and Hulu for that now. But back then, I was definitely, just let it play all the way through. I got tired of skipping.
So Like, do you like how well do you like the song? Like, if you're gonna give it a score out of 10, what would you rate the Buffy's theme song, the guitar?
See, this is hard because there's so much nostalgia attached to it.
Mm.
So, like, when I hear the song, not only do I hear the song, but, like, as most people, when you hear something from, your younger years, you're taken back to that point, and, you feel good. So I love the theme song because it reminds me of, fifth, well, oh God, yeah, 14 to 15, 16, 17-year-old Marc, like watching Buffy.
Mm.
Like, yeah, it was a good time. But if I had to judge it on its own merits, it's not horrible. It's just an instrumental. There are no words, so it's not like
Yeah.
something you can kind of sing along to. So, no, it's no Friends theme,
Yeah.
So I have to give it, a
But I think in a
solid.
way, like, because it doesn't have any words, it's less likely to become an irritation.
That is also true. That is also true. But I grew up with some great theme songs, man. Like Tailspin, Darkwing Duck, DuckTales. Those were
Mm.
great theme songs. But I don't want to go off on a tangent. But I will say, I will give it a solid 6.
Yeah,
Not the worst, not the best. It's okay. I think it's a 6.
I think I like it a little bit better. I'd probably give it a 7, maybe 7.5. I love the theme song. It is one of those where as soon as I hear it, I immediately know where it's from. Not that I would
Yeah.
hear it out in the wild anywhere, but it's it's great. I think it really sets the mood. This combination, especially like the opening organ notes, and then into
Yeah.
the guitar. It really has a great melding of like the classic horror, like the classic vampires, and then the early 2000s era that Buffy is set in. I think it's a good combination of those two worlds, which Buffy the show is also that.
Right, right. Very true. In a slight tangent, but still in the same universe, as I was saying, I watched this episode of Buffy, just wanted to kind of reacclimate myself to it on Amazon. And while I was going through Amazon, I saw another vampire show from the 90s that I haven't thought about in decades. And that was Forever Night. Did you watch did you watch anything did you watch any Forever Night?
I did, but I have like almost zero memory of it other than the fact that I know it existed and I'm pretty sure that I watched it, but I couldn't tell you a single detail about the show.
It's okay because I couldn't either. Because I remember like it was on TV. I'm like, oh, this is like vampires and it's cool. But I was like
Now, wasn't that
7
the one
or
where
8.
where it's like a vampire detective, kind of like the first couple seasons of Angel?
Yeah, pretty much like tortured vampire who wants to, do away with his vampirism and, and be like a regular person.
Mm.
And I'm like, oh, wow, this is on Amazon. I need to watch this, at some point. So like I saved it into my watch list. Like, oh, I'll get back to this eventually. But I just wanted to shout that out there. Like 90s vampire, kind of the precursor to, Buffy the Vampire Slayer
Yeah.
on network television. But yeah, that's something I'll definitely watch, in the future.
All right, so after the credits, we go into Willow's sociology class with Professor Mike, and I think I'm pretty sure that the fact that his name is Mike is a subtle pun on the title of the episode, Life Cereal. Like, if you remember that classic Life Cereal commercial about Mikey,
Oh yeah.
will Mikey like it? Like, Mikey likes it. And Willow says, you like Mike.
I didn't catch that, but yeah, that definitely makes, that fits. That tracks.
And I will say that this scene is kind of the one that irritates me the most in this episode because it feels so bizarre. Like I know that this is college, but this one student that says, his answer is, each individual participates fully in the construction of his or her own life. Like, who talks that way?
Very true, very true. But you know who talks that way? the kid who read it directly from the book, who didn't synthesize the information, that's literally verbatim what the textbook said. And he knows that's what the teacher wants to hear, what's in the textbook. So he did it.
And yet you have this classroom that's like full of a bunch of excited students. Like I'd say 90% of the class raises their hands whenever the teacher asks. And you have this, like, the table's set up in a U-shaped, but there's also like students lined up along the wall on chairs. Like it almost feels like are these like groupies? Are they like, is the classroom too crowded for the amount of space because it's like overfilled? Like Buffy was lucky enough to get a seat at the table, but you've got like a half a dozen kids that don't get a table in front of them just to fill out the room.
Yes. Actually, oh, I've not thought about college this much in years, brother. Okay, you are taking me back. So, two things. I definitely had classes like this where the room was far too small for the amount of students there that they had to be in. But this is also like a sociology class. So I had a sociology class and in some other classes along the same line where this setup is called like the Socratic Circle. So like essentially it's like there's like, in this case it's a U, and it was when I did it. But if you sit in the front, you're most active, like you have something poignant to say, and the people who are sitting behind them are trying to get at the table. So if someone behind you says something more interesting than you have to get up from your seat at the table and they take your seat. It was a very interesting way to run a class. I enjoyed it actually back then. I always had a seat at the table because I always talked. But yeah, but in this case, I just think, the classroom is far too small for the amount of students that are in it, and they're just trying to, make way. Yeah. And these students look old as hell. Like, oh my God, like, sir, you are not a college student. Or, they're going back to like, was it season 5 with the underground military, kids in the college? That was season 5, yeah, the glory season. So yeah, so I'm like, unless they're still, the initiative, yes, the initiative. Yeah. If the initiative is still around, then okay. But some of you are far too old to be looking like college students, like sophomores. You look older than me now, and I'm 37.
Yeah, and the other line that I wrote down is Willow's answer. Social phenomenon don't have unproblematic objective existences. They have to be interpreted and given meanings by those who encounter them.
That's false. I don't think that's true, Willow.
Yeah, and that is a mouthful, and she answers it like even half paying attention to Buffy, and she's trying to say like, just go with the flow. It's like Willow didn't give Buffy any prep time beforehand. Like Buffy didn't do any of the reading. She's just going in there, and Willow's like, yeah, you'll get the hang of it. All these, extremely large words and ideas and concepts just by hanging out.
Yeah, and that was definitely like a level 400 class. Like, you cannot audit a level 400 class. Just drop someone into that. All that. Like, no. That was like graduate level. Mm-hmm. That was not Sociology 101, is all I'm saying. It wasn't 201 either. But, yeah, that was quite unfair to drop poor Buffy in there.
Yeah, and so she's already feeling out of her depth, and they're talking in the hallway in the meetup with Tara, and then Warren comes in and runs into her and puts his device on her, and it's, a very small hexagonal metallic looking object about the size of like, almost like a small diamond earring, but it's, I guess it attaches with sticky tape or something.
Right, it was definitely given like rhinestone. Bedazzled.
It almost, to me, it almost looks like just the head of a hexagonal bolt.
I mean, definitely, I can see that.
And, Willow calls him a rudo, and Warren's just wearing his gray hoodie and his mechanic's hat that has the name Willie on it. And he calls back to the van, and he says, Francis 7, this is Logan 5, which is a reference to Logan's Run. And Francis was the Sandman who was chasing after Logan, who was trying to run. I haven't seen Logan's Run myself. Have you?
I have not.
All right. So I don't really have anything else to say about that. I wouldn't have even known that Francis was the name of another character until I looked it up and saw that it was basically the character chasing Logan. And they're running Apple products in the van, and this attack feels, Warren is the tech guy of the trio, and this is basically the tech attack, even though it feels semi-magical in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And we have this, and then we go back to Buffy and Tara in the hallway, getting ready to head towards Tara's class, and to her art class, her art history class, I guess. And she actually tries to give Buffy a little bit of prep ahead of time by giving her the art book. And Buffy opens it up, and we see on one side, you can see like the classic well-known portrait of Henry VIII, but the one focused is this picture of a 17th century sculpture called the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa. And this is I think very much chosen for the show, because it shows Saint Teresa in a state of ecstasy, and there's an angel standing above her holding a spear. And I was curious, so I looked up, and the scene that this is supposed to be representing is like it's supposed to represent an account from Saint Teresa where she's describing her experience with religious ecstasy. And she describes it as like an angel piercing her heart with a spear tipped with fire, like over and over again. And whenever the spear leaves her, it fills her with the love of God. And the description has very like BDSM vibes, because she talks about how like the pain is like overwhelming, but in a good way, and it's like it's weird.
You know what? I do not want to go off on a tangent, but I was raised Protestant, and the Catholics could concern me sometimes. Like the idea of ecstasy. I don't think of ecstasy when I think of the Lord. No, those are two ideas aren't necessarily combined in my head, and I don't. It's very strange. It is. I cannot say that it is something that is. I don't want to say not normal, but it's interesting. It is interesting. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, it is. It does give you BDSM vibes.
Yeah, and of course it also I think is very thematic with this part of this season, because Buffy can look at that and it reminds her of her getting pulled out of heaven, just not that long ago, and where she has this, where she can see herself in Saint Teresa with the ecstasy of being in heaven, and then her friends as this angel that are stabbing her and represent pulling her out of heaven back into the real world.
Yeah. And the fact that the angel is an angel and her ex-boyfriend is named Angel. It works on multiple levels.
Mm-hmm. Even though Angel wasn't directly involved in the magic spell.
Right.
And I did listen to a bunch of podcasts that discussed this episode, and most people complained about how this was done, but I think it actually fits really well. The timing that the trio used to have her start skipping time, because the first time they use it, she's looking at her book, and my guess is that she only loses 30 seconds to a minute in this first one. And Tara doesn't notice, and she's talking about Willow's yummy face. And the fact that, if you read into what Tara's saying, she thought that Willow didn't like her cooking until she realized that the face that she was making to her, it looked like a disgusted face, but it was actually her yummy face. It was the face that she made whenever she liked the food, even though Tara initially interpreted it as her not liking the food. Which is, I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with anything, but that's how it is.
But that's interesting. People didn't like the way they did this scene. I thought this scene was done pretty well, considering, the parameters. Well, it's network television. They have a huge budget, I would imagine, as far as like the makeup department and getting all that stuff gone, worked. It's a Monster of the Week show, so you would imagine a lot of money goes into, makeup, prosthetics and things. And I think that how they did the time skip didn't require, CGI or any special effects really. Not a whole lot.
Like the first couple of times, it's really just the sound effect.
Right. It's just a whoosh and then, this jump in conversation. And it's interesting because at this point, we don't know what we don't know what Warren is trying to do. Mm-hmm. We just know that he put something on her. Something's going to happen. They're trying to figure out, how to take down Buffy. But, you as the viewer are essentially just as, you're kind of knocked out of it as much as Buffy is. You're experiencing her disorientation, while she is like, huh? Like did you at least I questioned myself when I first saw this, like, hold on, did I miss something? Was I not paying attention? Like, what happened? And I think that's a great effect to pull off, for any type of production, but also to do it with, little to no real change in expense. You see what I'm saying? Like, I think they did a great job in hiding the fact that this doesn't cost too much money, but still getting a big effect from it.
Yeah, and then the next part, Tara starts talking about how she spaced out watching SpongeBob SquarePants with Tara, which is weird to think about, that she's talking about watching SpongeBob SquarePants, and that's a show that's still running today.
Yes, I remember when SpongeBob debuted. I was in high school. Yes, I remember.
And I think it's also not that big of a stretch to think that Tara just ignored Buffy frozen at the drinking fountain, because I think that this was only maybe like 30 seconds, because I think that's plenty of time for Tara to finish her sentence about spacing out on SpongeBob SquarePants and then walking to the door expecting that Buffy is going to turn around and follow her as soon as she finishes drinking. And it's a bit of a long time, but I think it's not beyond the realm of expectations that somebody could drink at a drinking fountain for like 30 seconds.
Yeah, I agree.
And then the next time, Tara goes through the door or she starts to go through the door, and they have the nice cutoff of Buffy saying, "What the f-?" And they cut back to the trio. And they say that they know that it's working. And then after Tara goes through the door, it's not until the door shuts and the class starts that, she loses the next chunk of time, which I guess would be, she probably lost 45 minutes or so, which would be the time of the class.
Right.
And then and again, I think that fits with Tara, because I think that Tara's personality is the type of person that if she just made it to class right when the class started and the doors shut, she would not be the type of person to call attention to herself by getting up and leaving class after it had started to check on Buffy.
That tracks. I agree. Like, she's out there and she's the Slayer. I'm pretty sure she's fine.
Mm. And then we see the clock moving ahead to really show us exactly, or at least show the audience exactly what's happened. And based on this, I track it is that she seems to be losing about 10 minutes per second, based on how long we see the clock.
Right.
Because it moves forward 20 minutes and about 2 seconds. And then she runs out into the courtyard, and then time starts moving fast again. and I clocked it, and this scene goes on for 49 seconds. And this is another bit where I have a little bit of a problem, because for as long as they have this scene go on, that would be 8 hours that
Yeah.
she's stuck, and time is moving fast, and we don't really get the sense that it moves from morning to afternoon. And like whenever they self-destruct the device, like school seems like it's still just as crowded as it was in the morning.
Right. And this is where one of my problems comes into play in the scene. Oh, like she just magically hears this time, you know? Like, oh, I hear something. There's something on me. Like, okay.
Yeah, because
I guess.
I agree, because I didn't think that the sound was coming from the device. I thought the sound was just like the buzz of the noise coming from around her, of everything going fast.
Yeah, so that, I'm like, okay, I guess you wanted this shtick to be over and you wanted to move on to the next thing. But yeah, if I had to fault anything, it wouldn't be how they did the time shift. And I thought that was really pretty good. But this, yeah, I take off points for this one, guys. She just heard it.
And I also think that it's weird that they have this chip cam that's showing them video feed from Buffy's perspective, where they're seeing Buffy in normal time. And I think it could work in a way, because, like, do you think that the trio are in the van on Buffy's time or in normal time?
I think this is one of the plot holes that they just kind of overlooked. But while on that subject, though, like, you essentially have solved the space-time continuum using this information to inconvenience the Slayer. You could have taken over the world with this information many times over and leave Sunnydale. But, yeah, so I would imagine that whatever paradox they have Buffy in, the van also exists in that same paradox. So
yeah, the way that I think that it should have worked, but it would take a lot more time to visually show this to the audience, is if they were in normal time, but they had like Buffy vision, like on a loop. So if she's like basically moving in super slow motion, then it would have like a playback of the previous several seconds, so they can get like kind of a real-time view of how Buffy has experienced things. But they would also have, like, the other one would be the normal time view, where it's her basically moving in slow motion.
Right.
But then they would have a lot more time to react if she's moving in basically super duper slow motion. And, they do the self-destruct, and it just poofs, and it's a very small explosion. It's literally just like a poof. There's no fire.
Yeah, it's like a little pop rock.
Yeah. Not even a pop rock, because I feel like that has, a little flash of fire. This is just like a little poof, like barely anything, and just like a little puff of smoke that immediately dissipates and leaves Buffy confused. And then we get to the scoring, and this, spoiler alert, this is the only one of the 3 tests that we actually hear get scored. Although I'm pretty sure that I'm going to try to use this, and in the future episodes, I'm going to have me and my guest are going to score the other two tests ourselves. So he gets 50 points for ingenuity, 30 points for actual contact. So I'm guessing that's because he actually physically touched the Slayer in order to put the device on her.
Mm-hmm.
And then he gets a 7 out of 10 for the freak out factor. And then I guess, they multiply that by 20 to get 140 points for a total of 220 points.
Yes.
So what do you think about their scoring solution? Because the way they describe it, it seems like they give the most weight to how much they freak out the Slayer.
Right. Which, I understand that. I think that's a good thing because she's the Slayer. She's seen some weird stuff. And if you can freak out Buffy, that's something pretty heavy. So I think the weighted score in that way is fine. It's kind of hard to judge their scoring without their rubric or having another score to compare it to.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish they would have scored the other test. I did make it to the next test while I was watching the episode prior to the podcast. I did make it to the next test, and they did not score that one. And I'm like,
Yeah, they don't scare either of the other two tests, but they do kind of compare it a little bit. Because after the time loop test, they say that that one took the longest, but only from her perspective and not from like Giles' perspective.
Right.
From Giles' perspective, it was the shortest. But that's the end of this test. So, what do you think, I guess, overall about Warren's test and the first act of this episode?
Well, Warren's test, I mentioned a little earlier, like the application, sir, of what you did to just screw up the Slayer could have been on such a larger scale. You could have done so much more in your hopes of world domination than just to screw with Buffy. But then again, it wouldn't be in a Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode if she wasn't the center of it. So I get it, but like just objectively looking at it, like you manipulated time. That takes so much. And not only does it take so much, but to put it in an object that's less than like 4 centimeters wide, like it's TV and movie magic
minuscule.
in play.
Although they did imply that the van was actually what made it work in a way. I think maybe that's the device was just like a kind of a beacon, like a homing beacon to know for the van to lock on to. You could look at it that way.
You could. But you invented time travel, sir. You wasted it on Buffy. Like, come on. Come on.
And I feel like they could have been more effective if they would have had a more active role because they knew where Buffy was, and they would basically be turning all 3 of them into the Flash. So they would be able to, like if they added a physical attack component, even though they're both weak and nerdy, the fact that they're moving at Flash speed compared to her, like you saw her getting knocked around by people just walking past her and bumping into her.
Mm-hmm. But you know what? At the same time, though, looking, I should say remembering and not looking, but remembering season 6 as a whole, this could play into, the increase in aggression against, the trio against the Scooby Gang.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at the whole season, I don't want to give too much away, depending on, what you're going to talk about, during the Buffy episodes. But, these are 3 nerds. These are 3 nerds. They have ideas, or they're being influenced by others' ideas of world domination and diabolicalness, if that's a word. But, they are pretty meek at the same time. And as their plans begin, or as they continue to foil each plan as they progress throughout the season, they go, they up the ante, is what I'll say, into a particular event that does not end very well for one of them. I'll leave it at that.
There's definitely a level of escalation, and this is really their first attempt. And so this is them just messing with the Slayer rather than actively trying to kill her.
Right.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up this episode. I'd like to thank you for joining me. And, why don't you go ahead and take a moment to let everybody else know where they can find you online?
All right, guys. Well, as I was introduced, I am a member of the French Toast Sunday podcast. We have been on a small hiatus for the last 2 years, thanks to the pandemic. But we are still very much a podcast. We are still very much friends. It will be coming back fairly soon. You can see me on Cluett's Deep Sea podcast. We talk about the episode of actually Nightmare on not the episode, but the movie rather, Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Warrior. That should be coming out pretty soon. And also on the Rabbit Hole podcast, you'll be seeing me and another podcaster, Heather Baxendale Walsh, in a new format for a new podcast. I don't want to give out too much away, but this episode here is pretty closely related to it. I'll leave it at that. But more, that is still very much in the planning stages, so more on that later.
I think by the time this episode comes out, that will already be available and airing, hopefully. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that as well. I'm excited. But yeah, as for me, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightstights@movienights.com. You can find me on Twitter, where I'm at Bubbawheat. You can listen to this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. You can join that and discuss episodes as they come out, and hear news about future seasons of this show. And you can also have discussions about time loop movies, TV shows, novels, comic books, anything of that sort is welcome. So until next time, grr.
Arg.
Wedding Rear.
Numbing hand.
Wedding Rear.
Essence of slug. Numbing hand.
Wedding Rear.
Essence of slug. Numbing hand.
Wedding Rear.